Have you ever felt that strange chill when you're alone at night? Maybe it's nothing, or maybe it's something watching you. Don't worry, just stay with me. Keep listening, and let's see how brave you really are. The Laughing Family. I've had many night terrors in my life and have struggled with several sleeping disorders. Hell, I can't even count how many times I've experienced sleep paralysis. It's truly disturbing. I've also woken up to see spiders and giant bugs crawling on my bed countless times, only for them to disappear as I start snapping back to reality. The hallucinations are always so real and vivid that I end up jumping out of bed, screaming, throwing pillows at creatures that don't exist. And don't even get me started on the constant nightmares. There was one particularly stressful week of school when I was buried in homework from all my classes. I was exhausted, mentally and physically, with half my assignments due the next morning. It was Friday, and I'd stayed up extremely late for a school night, probably around 3 a.m., and I had to wake up in just 3 hours. When I finally finished everything, I crashed into bed and was out cold almost instantly. That night, I had another bad dream. The best way I can describe it is that I was in this long, narrow building that I was trying to escape from. In every room I passed through, I kept finding pieces of candy, like it was some twisted Halloween attraction. But the entire time, I was running away from something. Whatever it was kept laughing, a child's laughter that echoed from everywhere. What finally woke me up was reaching what I thought was the final door of the building. The laughter grew louder and louder, and when I opened that door, I woke up, in my bed. I couldn't move. It was happening again, sleep paralysis. Then, from the middle of the room, I heard the same laughter. My eyes slowly adjusted, and that's when I saw them, 4 figures standing together in the center of my room. They looked like a family, a tall man, a woman, a small boy, and a little girl. They were all holding hands, staring at me with impossibly wide grins, and laughing. I felt that familiar, crushing pressure in my chest. But this time, it was worse. It felt like they were getting closer, or bigger, floating toward me. My heart was pounding, but my body wouldn't move. Finally, when I could, I shot up, threw the sheets off, grabbed my pillows, and hurled them toward the middle of the room while screaming. But when the pillows landed, there was nothing there. The 4 figures were gone. The laughter had stopped. I'd never experienced a hallucination that vivid before, even after all my years dealing with sleep paralysis. The next day, I saw my doctor, who prescribed new medication. Since then, I've still had my share of night terrors, but nothing has ever come close to that night. The eyes in the boiler room. When I was 10 and my youngest brother Ben was only 1, there was this one weekend when my parents were painting our bedrooms, so we had to sleep in the basement. There was a pull-out couch down there that turned into a bed, and Ben had an extra crib set up beside it. I was only 10, so sleeping in a pitch-dark basement was really uncomfortable, but somehow having Ben down there made me feel a bit safer. He would wake me up in the middle of the night crying, and for some reason, tending to him made sleeping down there a little less scary. But there was one night when I woke up to him screaming, not crying, screaming, the kind of sound no 1-year-old should make. I was scared shitless immediately and ran over to him to see what was wrong. He was standing up in his crib, looking at me and pointing towards something. I turned in the direction he was pointing, straight into the pitch-dark boiler room right next to his crib. I felt like 1,000 knives had just stabbed me in the chest. Even through the panic, I remember hearing the faint sound of something falling over in that room. I could feel eyes on me, like something was watching us from the darkness. I grabbed Ben and got the hell out of there as fast as I could. I've never gone back down into that basement since. The man at Grandma's door. I was only about 9 years old when this happened. I was sleeping at my grandma's house for the weekend, which I often did when I was little. It was a stormy day out, and my grandma was at the nearby grocery store getting ingredients for dinner. I was in the living room watching SpongeBob when the phone rang. There was obviously zero reason for me to answer the phone, but I was a little kid with a little kid brain. There's no explaining any decisions made. I went to the kitchen and picked up the phone, and after my little kid voice said, "Hello," into the phone, the man's voice on the other end said, "Can I speak to the adult in the house?" I said, "She's not home," and the voice responded, "So you're all alone right now?" I remember I paused for a second, then said, "Yeah." Even at my age, I knew after he asked that it probably wasn't a good idea to have picked up the phone. The person on the other end then asked if the current address he had on file was correct, but I didn't answer that. I hung up the phone, and now I was nervous. I was worried I might have just gotten my grandma in trouble. Nonetheless, I went back to watching SpongeBob. 20 minutes later or so, there was a frantic knocking at the door. I muted the TV and listened. Along with the knocking, someone on the other end cried out, "Please help." It was a man. I snuck over to the edge of the wall where the opening for the front door was, to take a peek and see if I saw anyone standing on the other side of the door through the glass at the top. That was a mistake, because I did, and they saw me too. The man on the other side of the door immediately said, "Little boy, please open the door, I'm hurt bad." I ran to the corner of the room by the window and closed the blinds so I could hide behind the couch. I was so scared. There were no cell phones back then. I couldn't call my grandma. The man kept pounding on the door, his cries for help turning more annoyed sounding, and his knocks got louder and more frequent. Then the pounding stopped, and he started knocking on the window right next to me. The creep started saying things like, "I'm not gonna hurt you," and "Please, I'm bleeding bad." I started to cry in the corner, still hiding behind the couch. The pounding stopped finally, and after a minute, I ran to my grandma's room and locked the door. I laid in her bed under the covers with only my head sticking out. The rain hitting the windowsill and the occasional distant thunder were weirdly calming, at least for a little bit. The man on the other side appeared at one of the windows and started trying to lift it open. Thank God all the windows were locked. I hid under the covers completely, and I don't think he saw me in there. This was the last time I saw or heard that man. 20 minutes later, I heard my grandma come in through the front door. I ran into her arms, crying and apologizing, and told her everything. She, of course, called the police, and when the officers needed me to give whatever details I could, my grandma called me into the room, and I answered their questions. Then she sent me back off to the guest bedroom to watch TV. Unfortunately, that man was never caught. For this, at least. My grandma never told my parents, and she told me not to tell them either. But she also never left me alone again any time I slept over after that, which wasn't many times. Long story short, I was one unlocked door away from undoubtedly being kidnapped. The man behind the hat. I was 13 years old. I had the most isolated bedroom imaginable. Mix that with a wild imagination, and I was often up late at night, scared and paranoid, unable to fall asleep. My bedroom was on a separate floor of the house, on the opposite side from my parents' room. They had no way of hearing what was going on in my room. It was a seemingly ordinary night, with a bit of rain, but not a storm. I woke up and looked at my clock. It was 2 in the morning. I got an uncomfortable feeling right away, but I didn't know why. Then I saw, at the edge of my bed, the shadow of something roundish, just over the headboard. My heart started racing until I realized it was just my hat. I sometimes hung my hat on one of the wooden poles at the edge of my bed, so I calmed myself down and fell back asleep. I woke up again around half an hour later and was once again startled by the shadow at the end of my bed. But after my brain fully woke up, I remembered it was just my hat again. This process happened one more time that night, probably another half hour later, and once again, I was startled by the sight of the shadow. I was getting thirsty, so I reached my hand down to the side of my bed, looking for my water bottle. But instead, I found something else, my hat. And at that instant, I felt my heart drop into my stomach. As I almost fell out of my bed trying to turn the lamp on, The light revealed the face of a man peering over the edge of my bed, staring right into my eyes. I let out the highest-pitched scream a boy could possibly produce and ran straight past the man and down the stairs from my room. I felt the man try to grab me, but I managed to open the door and run to my parents' room to get my dad. My dad grabbed the baton from under his bed and raced to my room, but he was too late. When we got back, the window was wide open. Apparently, the man had jumped out onto the patio roof outside my window. The sigh in the dark. When I was maybe 12 or 13, my mom, my stepdad, our 2 dogs and I went to the beach for the weekend. We rented an apartment all the way at the back of the shore. The apartment didn't seem strange at first glance. We unpacked everything and went out for dinner right after. When we came back, it was around 9 p.m. We watched some TV for about an hour. My mom, stepdad, and the dogs slept on a bed made from the couch, and they gave me the bedroom with a king-sized bed. I went to bed and used my computer for a while, playing some games I had pre-installed since I knew there wouldn't be an internet connection. I stayed up pretty late and eventually decided it was time to get some sleep. Maybe 5 minutes after lying down, complete silence filled the room. Then suddenly, I heard an extremely loud sigh. I knew it wasn't my parents or the dogs, especially since the door to the living room was closed. I bolted out of that room and went to sleep in the small bedroom opposite the master bedroom. My heart was pounding so fast, I was absolutely petrified. Needless to say, I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I told my parents about it, and they said it was probably just my imagination, but I was certain it wasn't. This story still gives me nightmares to this day. The Man Below. My balcony. This story goes back a few years ago when I was 30 years old. I was at my condo in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. My condo, which I still own, is on the second floor of a decently nice building that I won't name for privacy reasons. Whenever I go down there, it's during the colder months up north, and I'm a complete beach bum when I'm there. Luckily for me, I work remotely through my laptop and phone, so I've always been able to retreat down there whenever I'd like. Fort Lauderdale is, for the most part, a pretty clean and safe city, and the specific location my building is in is no exception. Usually, that is. It was the middle of January, late at night, past 10 o'clock. I was out on my balcony with my feet over the railing, on my laptop, when all of a sudden I heard someone yelling from down below. They were shouting, "Yo," and "Hey, you!" At first, I didn't move, assuming whoever it was talking to someone else. They couldn't possibly be calling up to me. But then I heard, "Hey, you up there!" And my heart skipped a beat because now I knew they were talking to me. My main question was, why? I set my laptop down on the chair and looked over the railing. There was a guy standing in front of a car in the parking lot, looking up at me, and he said, "Yeah, you." I asked, "What's up?" He told me to come down so he could show me something cool. I took a better look at him, a guy with a backward hat and a tank top, and assumed he was just some punk kid messing with me. So I ignored him and sat back down. When I did, I heard him laughing as he said, "I'm gonna come up there and skin you alive, you prick." I stood up again and looked at him. He had this unsettling, sinister smile on his face, and I realized he looked older than I'd first thought. He wasn't some kid. I opened my mouth to shout something back, but for some reason, I didn't bother. I grabbed my laptop, went inside, and shut the sliding door. I expected him to yell up a few more things, but I didn't hear him. As uncomfortable as it made me, I felt much safer inside. I chalked it up to just the occasional coked-up Florida lunatic on the streets. But things escalated when the silence of the room was broken by pounding on my condo door, accompanied by a voice yelling obscenities and threats at me. It was the guy again. The bangs were so loud I was genuinely concerned he was going to break the door down. All I could do was yell, "I'm calling the police." That didn't faze him. The banging turned into these carving and stabbing noises. It probably lasted only a minute or two, but felt like a century, until he gave one more loud, angry bang, screamed another obscenity, and left. I knew because I checked through the peephole. I called the police afterward to report it, and when I showed them the door, there were several stab marks in it, confirming I had heard him stabbing and that he had a knife. I pray nobody else was harmed that night. I doubt he knew me. I think he was just a really crazy person looking to hurt someone. The voice in the basement. This is one of the few truly unexplainable events I've experienced in my life. I was upstairs in my room, working on a paper for my history class. As far as I knew, I was home alone, but apparently I was mistaken because my mom's voice suddenly called out from downstairs, yelling my name. I called back, "What?" But she didn't answer. Slightly annoyed at being interrupted while I was focused on my writing, I reluctantly got up and went downstairs to see what she wanted. When I got there, I looked around, but she wasn't anywhere in sight. I called out, "Mom?" and she called my name again in response, this time from down in the basement. I walked over to the basement door, but the lights were off. I called down the stairs, "Mom?" again, and once more she called my name. "What are you doing down there with the lights off?" I shouted, but there was no reply. I flicked on the light and started down the steps. As I neared the bottom, I heard her call my name again, and that's when things got really strange. Each time she said my name, it sounded exactly the same. There was zero difference in tone or inflection, like it was being played on repeat. I called out again, and once again she responded the exact same way, but she was nowhere to be seen in the basement. Then I noticed the crawlspace closet door was open. It's a weird, low closet that you have to crawl into, but it takes up a large section of the basement. That was the only place left where she could possibly be. I said, "Mom," one last time. No answer. I got down on my knees and tried to look inside. It was pitch black, and I was starting to get seriously freaked out. "Mom, are you messing with me?" I said. But there was no response, only the faint buzzing from the basement light. My heart was pounding. I stood up and, for reasons I can't fully explain, sprinted back upstairs, slamming and locking the basement door behind me. I didn't know what I had just witnessed or heard, but I immediately grabbed the house phone and called my mom's cell. It rang a few times before she picked up, and she told me she was out grocery shopping. I tried to explain what happened, but of course she didn't believe me. She thought I was just joking around. It took me half an hour of convincing before she finally took me seriously, and when she and my dad got home, we all went down to the basement together. The crawlspace door was still open. My dad went inside to check, but there was no one there. To this day, that remains the most haunting and unexplainable experience of my life. Kathy in the dark. I'm not a fan of my dad's girlfriend at all, not from the start. Her name is Kathy. My dad has been widowed since 2019 when our mom died, and I know he's gotten lonely and he's pretty much ready to settle with anybody now, even Kathy. And against my warnings, he doesn't listen. I've been seeing her do some sketchy things around the house, and it's really starting to freak me out now. I'll start from the beginning. I have two siblings, my 10-year-old brother Jake and my 2-year-old brother Scotty. From the day he introduced her to us, I didn't like something about her smile. It was just unsettlingly wide and exaggerated. Pretty soon he'd start bringing her around a lot more, and I just never loved her honestly. But at first it was only because I felt something was off about her personality. Then things started happening. She's been staying with us for a while now, and a few weeks ago I caught her in my dad's closet while he wasn't home. My dad's safe is in his closet, along with where he hides the combination and some other valuables. When she saw me at the doorway, she smiled and said, "Hey, what's up, sweetie?" to me with her annoying, creepy smile. I didn't say anything other than nothing. Then she shut his closet door, and I walked away to my room. I told my dad about it, but he didn't seem concerned. A few days after that, while my dad was at work again, I just got back from school and was walking upstairs to my room, and as I was, I saw Kathy leave my little brother Jake's room and shut the door behind her. I asked her what she was doing in his room. She smiled and said, I was just opening the window. It's hot in the house. I didn't answer and walked up to my room. When I heard her go downstairs eventually, I snuck to Jake's room to check if she actually had opened the window, and both windows were shut. Something was up with this lady, and I knew it, and I still know it. I told my dad again, and in response, he asked me to just please be patient with the situation and that he knows I don't care for Kathy. I didn't bother telling Jake. Fast forward to 2 days ago. Jake, my dad, and I were all not home, and Kathy was babysitting Scotty. I came home unannounced, but I wanted to be secretive about it because I wanted to see if I could catch her doing anything again. I snuck into the house and went to my room quietly. Eventually, from the kitchen downstairs, I started to hear Scotty crying. Not regular crying, like a very distressed kind of crying. And I heard Kathy screaming at the top of her lungs to shut the F up. It was the first time I heard her raise her voice, and I believe it was the first time I was hearing her true colors come out. I ran downstairs to yell at her to leave my brother alone. She was startled and shocked that I was home, and for the first time, she didn't give me her creepy smile. She looked at me blankly and went downstairs and shut the door. I called my dad and told him right away, and that night my dad had a conversation with her about it. I don't know how it went, but I assume not good. Because that night I woke up in the middle of the night to something and looked up into my room. There was someone in my room. They quickly left the room and shut the door behind them. I got out of bed and opened my door, and as I got into the hall, I saw and heard my dad's bedroom door close. I went over to my dad's room and opened the door, and both Kathy and my dad were laying in the bed. I woke my dad up furiously and told him Kathy was just in my room. She denied the whole thing, saying she was in bed. I don't know if my dad believed me or not, but he told me to go back to my room and he'd talk with Kathy. I obeyed, and I heard them whispering as I shut the door. I went back to bed, and I was scared. I'm still scared. I want her out of the house and out of our lives. I think she's dangerous. Why was she in my room? It's freaking me out. I worry for my family's well-being, and I don't know what we can do. The knock at the cabin. It was the dead of winter in California. My friends and I were on a skiing trip near South Lake Tahoe, staying in a big luxurious log cabin for a few nights. On the third night, during a blizzard, I got up late to get a glass of water. As I crossed the cabin toward the kitchen, there was a frantic knock at the door. I was spooked that someone would be knocking that late. At first, I thought I should ignore it and let them go away, but then I realized they knew we were there. My car was parked right outside. I also thought maybe someone was in trouble and needed help getting out of the storm. I tiptoed over to the door and waited for another knock. It didn't take long before the knocking came again, this time louder and more desperate. "Who is it?" I asked. No answer. I asked again, louder, still nothing. After that, the knocking stopped completely. My curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the door just a crack, leaving the chain lock on just in case. Nobody was outside. I undid the lock and opened the door all the way. There were footprints in the snow leading away from the cabin. For some stupid reason, maybe guilt or worry that someone was in danger, I slipped on my boots and jacket and stepped out into the storm to follow the footprints before they disappeared. The trail led to the edge of the property before stopping completely. I swear the footprints just ended. No tire marks, no signs of a struggle, nothing. It was as if whoever made them had vanished right where I stood. I felt a chill run through me and sprinted back to the cabin, slamming and locking the door behind me. Before I could even gather my thoughts, the frantic knocking resumed. My heart started pounding, and I screamed for my friends. One by one, they came out to see what was wrong. When we opened the door together, there was nobody there. The footprints had already been filled by the snow. I could never prove what happened to my friends, and I don't blame them for not believing me. Honestly, I can hardly believe it myself, but I know what I saw. And to this day, it still freaks me out. The falling picture. This is something that just happened to me, and I don't know how to feel about it other than freaked out. I'm not a spiritual person at all. I've been on and off seeing this guy named Spencer. I met him through a coworker one night when we were out together at a bar, and we hit it off. I finally introduced him to my family, and while my parents were indifferent about him, my grandparents didn't really care for him, my grandma especially. They both said they saw something bad in him, that he didn't seem like a good guy. My grandma mostly. This wasn't after a one-time meeting though. This was after I brought him around multiple times and everyone could get a good idea about him. And honestly, I started to see what they meant, because Spencer and I would get into constant arguments and he would lose his temper fairly easily on me. For this, we'd be on and off constantly. There was one night that I felt like he was about to raise his hands to me, but he held back and then calmed down. This was when I said, "I'm done," and dropped him. Or so I thought I was going to. My grandma was especially happy and said I could do much better. Then she went on about how I should go find a nice Italian boy from a nice family like she always did. Anyway, not long after this, my grandma died of a heart attack. During my grieving, I hung a picture of my grandma up on my wall in my room to commemorate her. This was only a month ago. I'd been having a horrible month, and out of weakness, when Spencer reached out to me 2 weeks ago, I answered, and we saw each other. We had been seeing each other every night these past 2 weeks, and I really thought he had changed because we hadn't argued a single time, and I just felt safe around him. Well, only a few days ago, Spencer and I agreed to be official boyfriend and girlfriend. And that night I woke up to a crash in my room. I panicked and flicked on the lamp, and it took me a moment to notice the picture of my grandma wasn't on the wall anymore. I got up and saw the frame had fallen to the floor and cracked. The picture frame I hung of my grandma had fallen and cracked on the night I agreed to date Spencer. I held the frame in my hand, my heart in my throat, my whole body shaking. I called Spencer the next day and told him I think we should go our separate ways for a while as my head isn't in the right place, and he blew up on the phone in anger. And that phone call proved my grandma was right about him. That picture frame falling and breaking. What could have caused it? There was no draft in the room, even as I imagined that it was somehow a sign from my grandma. Do you realize how freaking scary that is? The man in the woods. When I was a kid, I had a huge group of friends who all happened to live on my block. On weekend nights, we would always play manhunt, basically hide and seek for older kids. It worked out great because since we were all neighbors, we used all the front and backyards and even the woods behind our houses. We had a rule, though, that we couldn't go out more than a backyard's length into the woods. I always used the same hiding spot, and nobody ever found me. I hid behind an old rusty barrel that had been thrown into the woods years ago. On this particular night, there were only 6 of us playing. My friends Joe and Raj were on my team. We quickly dispersed since we were the first to hide. I ran to my usual spot, through my backyard and into the woods behind the barrel. Usually I would see the flashlights of the other team shining through the backyards, but it was unusually quiet this time. Then, I finally heard footsteps nearby. I didn't see a flashlight, so I assumed it was one of my teammates. I whispered Joe's and Raj's names, but then whoever it was started charging at me, full-on sprinting. I immediately shot up and ran out of the woods to find a new hiding spot in my backyard, but nobody ever came out of the woods. I heard all my friends calling my name from out front, including Joe and Raj, so I assumed something was wrong and went to the front yard. I saw Joe's parents talking with my parents, with all my friends gathered around. My parents seemed a bit relieved to see me, and I was really confused. They told me that a police officer had just passed by and warned them about a serial rapist spotted in the area, and that all the kids should stay indoors. I explained what had happened to me in the woods, and my parents started freaking out, making absolutely sure I wasn't lying. They called the police. I don't know if the guy was ever caught, but I really hope he was. I try not to think about what would have happened if whoever that was had caught me. The man at the door. My friend told me about something that happened to her when she was about 8 or 9 years old. She was walking home from school and took out her key to let herself into the house. Her single mom worked and usually came home later on weekdays. As she reached up to put the key in the door, her mom opened it, wearing a dressing gown, having left work early because she was sick. Instead of greeting her, she looked straight past my friend and immediately said, "Who are you?" My friend turned around and saw a man in a long coat hurrying back down the path and down the street. Being ill that day had possibly saved her daughter from something potentially horrible happening to her. The woman in the hallway. It was a brief period of time that I lived alone. When I had just moved out of my parents' house and before I met my girlfriend and she moved in, I lived in a small one-bedroom apartment downstairs in someone else's house. I spent a lot of time alone during this period of my life, except when I was at school or work, and so I spent much of my time watching movies. Specifically, I liked watching scary movies pretty often. Even as a 21-year-old guy at the time, I still got a little spooked trying to sleep after watching a scary movie, especially living alone in that apartment. Every time I did, I would look around the room, and at a few points, I would even turn the bedside lamp on just to check. The tenant upstairs wasn't home that night, as his car wasn't in the driveway, so the sounds I was hearing couldn't have been footsteps upstairs or anything like that. My nerves really started to set in at one point because I just kept hearing noises, and to be honest, I couldn't tell from where in the house they were coming. I got up, went to the bedroom door, and opened it. Outside was a very narrow hallway with a door to the bathroom, and at the end, it opened up to the living room. At the far end of this hallway, like a scene right out of the movie I had watched not even an hour earlier, there was someone standing by the kitchen. The moonlight from outside coming through the bedroom and living room windows was enough for me to see her, a woman looking right back at me. She started walking backward while still facing me. I didn't care. I screamed, backed into my room, slammed the door shut, and locked it. She didn't come running or pound on the door. Instead, I heard running up the half-flight of stairs to the exit of my apartment, and then the door slammed shut. I was frozen in shock for at least 10 minutes before I felt okay enough to take my phone and leave the room to check the apartment. It didn't take long. It was small, with not many hiding places. It was empty. I rushed to lock the door, wondering who that could have been and how she got in. I didn't call the police. I couldn't tell you why. But the next day, I called the landlord and told him about it. He made a phone call to the upstairs tenant, and what I learned shocked me. The woman who broke into my apartment was an ex-lover of the man who lived upstairs, a crazy one at that. After finding his address somehow, she broke into the wrong part of the house, my apartment. The upstairs tenant came down to my door and apologized the next day, but I never got much detail from him or the landlord. I still wonder what that woman was planning to do to him. The eye in the door. I was staying with one of my best friends in North Carolina, where I had a job interview. I was coming from New Jersey, and my friend Mike offered to let me crash at his place for a few days. He didn't live very close to the company I was interviewing for, about 2 hours away. But I also just wanted to see one of my good friends again. This happened after the second interview. I came back to Mike's place in a great mood since I'd been offered the job on the spot. We celebrated in the yard that night with a few friends and a few beers. Or a lot of beers. We stayed up late and basically got shit-faced. People were coming and going all night, and that's the kind of person Mike is. He never really kept track of who entered or left his house. Around 4 in the morning, after everyone had left, we called it a night. I struggled to make it up the stairs and into the bathroom. I drained the snake and splashed some hot water on my face. It was at that moment I thought I saw something in the corner of my eye. I turned toward the half-open door and saw an eye poking in at me through the crack. I let out a loud, "Holy shit," and, in my drunk and clumsy state, fell to the floor. When I got back on my feet, the eye was gone. I stumbled out of the bathroom and called Mike's name. I heard him answer from downstairs in the kitchen. It couldn't have been him. I didn't hear anyone go down the stairs, but I asked if he'd been up there anyway. As expected, he said no. I can't remember everything clearly, but I assume I brushed it off, thinking I just had too much to drink. I made it to the guest bedroom and basically collapsed onto the bed, barely managing to throw the covers over myself. You know when you're drunk, you fall asleep instantly. That was me. I think I passed out seconds after hitting the bed, only to wake up later, not sure how much time had passed. I immediately felt a pounding headache and began to rub my temples. It was probably a little before sunrise. The room was chilly, and my foot was sticking out from under the covers, hanging over the edge of the bed. Then it happened. I felt something ice cold grab my foot and start stroking it. A raspy voice whispered, "Can you help me?" I shot up and screamed at the top of my lungs before sprinting out of the room and meeting Mike at the top of the stairs. We called the police, and they arrived shortly after. The intruder turned out to be a woman in her late 40s who clearly suffered from some kind of addiction. She admitted to simply walking into Mike's house and hiding in a closet. The eye I saw had been hers, peeking at me through the crack of the bathroom door. I always make sure to cover my feet with the sheets now. The man in my son's room. I'm a father of 2 kids, ages 15 and 10. My wife was out of the house when this happened. I was in my room taking a nap in the middle of the day. My older son is always in and out all day with his friends, so when I heard the front door constantly opening and closing, it didn't concern me. But eventually, when I heard the storm door slam shut for the 4th time, I started to get annoyed and whistled for him to quiet down. Then I started hearing other loud noises from across the hallway, coming from my younger son Keith's room. I figured he was just playing with his wrestling toys or something, but even with my door shut, the noise got too loud. It was this constant thumping sound. I couldn't imagine what Keith could be doing, so I went across the hall to check. As I got closer, the sound became clearer. It was a heavy thumping on the wall. I pushed open his door, which was already ajar, and called Keith's name angrily, but I didn't see my son. Instead, I saw a grown man facing the wall, banging his head against it. There was blood on the wall from where he'd been hitting himself. The man gave me a side glance without turning his whole head, and in that instant, adrenaline kicked in. I tackled him to the floor, and that's when Keith crawled out from under his sheets where he had been hiding. The man didn't fight back. He just started shouting psychotic nonsense, rambling things that made no sense, clearly out of his mind. I told Keith to grab the house phone while I held the man down. After calling the police, I stayed in that position for at least 5 minutes until they arrived. The man just kept smiling, laughing, and saying strange things the whole time. He was either seriously ill, on heavy drugs, or both. I didn't press charges. I just hoped he was taken somewhere to get the help he obviously needed, and to make sure he was off the streets. The voice in the woods. I took my Jeep on a road trip to Colorado to do some off-roading in the wilderness. I was exploring a bunch of trails around Red Feather Lakes, and I ended the night on the Dead Man's Road Trail. It was a somewhat challenging route, but the scenery was unbeatable. I had packed a sleeping bag and planned on sleeping in the back of my Jeep with the rear seats folded down. I pulled off the main trail a little, just in case any other night drivers came through, though that was pretty unlikely. People might call me weird for enjoying off-roading and camping alone, but I've always liked doing things solo. I call it camping because to me, it's just luxury camping. Only instead of a tent, I'm in the back of my Jeep in the middle of the woods. I ate some protein bars and snacks for dinner, then set up my sleeping bag in the back. In case you're wondering, yes, it was dark, but I had my Jeep's LED light bar on, which lit up the surrounding area nicely. Eventually, I crawled into my sleeping bag, though I'd be lying if I said it was comfortable. It's just the price I pay to catch that sunrise off-roading view. I had all the windows closed to keep bugs out, but I could still hear everything outside. And then it happened. I heard a voice coming from the woods, followed by a short, loud laugh. As deep into the trail as I was, there was no way someone would just be walking around out there in total darkness. I looked out the windows, expecting to see headlights or tail lights, but there were none. Then I heard the voice again, this time clearer. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman at first, but my heart was racing. Someone was definitely out there. I strained to make out the words, and then it came, closer this time, in a clear voice that sounded like either a woman or a young boy. "Hello, I see you there." My stomach dropped. I wanted to jump into the driver's seat and take off, but I was too scared to move. I thought if I just stayed still, maybe whoever it was wouldn't see me. I know it makes no sense, but I froze, clinging to the hope that this wasn't real. Then came a loud bang on my rear windshield. I jumped up and practically dove over the front seats into the driver's seat, started the car, and tore down the trail as fast as I could. My heart was pounding, afraid they were running after me, but the rocky terrain kept me from going too fast. I was scared to look in the rear-view mirror, but when I finally did, I saw nothing, just the red glow of my taillights fading into the trees. It felt like a nightmare. Exhausted and shaken, I drove until I reached pavement, then continued for miles until I found a motel. Some people later asked, what if it was someone stranded who needed help? But I say, no way. No one's out there that late, in total darkness, laughing without a flashlight, that deep on a remote trail. And they wouldn't bang on my windshield like that if they weren't trying to scare me. People are messed up. Always watch your back and stay alert to your surroundings. The cellmate who found me. I once spent a night in jail, and I know everyone says this, but I really didn't do anything wrong. I was attacked by a bouncer at a nightclub in my hometown because a girl I had history with was there. And she had the nerve to lie to the bouncer, telling him I was touching her and her friends inappropriately when I hadn't even said a word to them. The bouncer came over, put his hands on me, and started pushing me out of the club, and honestly, in my drunken state, I pushed back. Of course, there were cops outside the bar, and between a drunk guy and a club bouncer, who do you think they sided with? I ended up handcuffed in the back of a cop car and was escorted to jail, where I spent the night. The cell only had one wooden bar to sit on, and one other guy in there with me. He asked what I was in for, and I told him, for bullshit. One look at him, and I knew I didn't belong there. Tattoos on his face, a missing front tooth, and this expression that said, "Don't mess with me or I'll cap you." I didn't want to rub him the wrong way, so I only talked when he talked to me. At one point, I opened up a bit, just out of anger at the situation and needing to vent. I ended up telling him some personal things, like where I was from, which happens to be the nicer side of town, and that I'd had people over since my parents were away. We pre-gamed, went to the club, and I basically gave him the rundown of my night. Since I was drunk, I just wanted to sleep, but he kept talking, which got annoying, until eventually he caught on and shut up. The next morning, we had to go to court because, yes, I was charged with assault and trespassing, 2 bogus charges. My cellmate had to go too. I saw the judge before he did, and he was in the back listening when my name and charges were read out loud. I was released with a future court date, and though it was a complete nightmare, the real horror came that night when I was home. My windows were open, and I started hearing multiple sets of footsteps circling the house. I went around shutting the windows one by one on the first floor, and when I reached the backyard sliding glass door that looked out onto the deck, I flicked on the light, and immediately, 2 guys ran off into the darkness. I recognized one of them as my cellmate. I closed the blinds and finished locking everything up, heart pounding. I couldn't believe he had found me, but it was obvious he was there to rob the house after I had told him my parents were away. He must have seen dollar signs when I mentioned the side of town I lived on, and probably heard my name in court. One quick Google search would have given him my address. The 2 guys took off, and I never heard from them again that night. I never told my parents I was arrested, and because of that, I also never told them that my cellmate almost came to rob our house. The open gate. My friend and I were going to a party a few hours out of town, so we decided to stay at her family's holiday house about an hour south of the party. We arrived around mid-afternoon, and since it was winter in a holiday town, The area was completely empty, no other cars on the street. When we left for the party, I hesitated for a moment, deciding whether to pull the gate all the way closed. I'd had some trouble opening it earlier when we arrived, and if we got home late at night, I didn't want to get stuck outside. In the end, I decided to shut it for security. The party was great. We got back to the house around 12:30 and the gate was open. I immediately felt uneasy because I knew I had locked it, and it couldn't have just blown open in the wind. Still, I didn't want to make a big deal of it, so I was vague when my friend asked if I'd closed it. We went inside and decided to make a snack. I was wandering through the house when suddenly my friend came racing from the kitchen into the hallway and practically tackled me to the ground. She was convinced she'd heard someone walking around outside. We tried to calm ourselves down, but we had no cell reception and there was no one else around. Over the next half hour, as we sat in the hallway paralyzed with fear, we heard footsteps outside and the back door being jimmied. We decided we had to leave, so we gathered our things and got ready to make a run for the car. Just as we reached the front door, there was a huge bang in the backyard, and suddenly what sounded like hundreds of birds started screaming. We bolted for the car, jumping in with all our stuff still on our laps. We didn't even bother putting it in the back seat. As we reversed out of the driveway, we saw someone running up the side of the house toward us. We sped the entire way home and didn't sleep at all that night. The finger around the door. Before I start this story, I want to note that Jacob's mother is a drug addict, and his father really didn't have much wrong with him outside of being with his mother. One night, when Jacob and his father were asleep, they heard a series of loud banging, scratching, and moving noises coming from the mother's room. Jacob's father jumped out of bed, ran down the hall, and started slamming on the door. His mother opened it, yelling at him to quiet down, saying he woke her up. He asked her about the sounds, but she hadn't been awake to hear them. Jacob's dad would have assumed she was on something again, but something was wrong. The window was open all the way, and the TV was moved across the room, still plugged in, with the screen facing outside. Jacob's dad was reasonably scared. He shut the window, grabbed his bat, locked the mother's room from the outside, and made her sleep in the living room. He stayed up most of the night. Around 5 a.m., while it was still dark, he woke Jacob up. Jacob went to the kitchen, where his mother was already sitting. A couple of minutes later, his dad walked in, wide-eyed. He pointed at Jacob and his mother and held a finger to his lips. They went silent. Then they heard something shuffling around on the roof, moving from edge to edge. Jacob's dad held the bat tightly. They sat together in the room, quietly listening. Minutes later, the sound went away. Jacob's grandmother was called and asked if they could stay over for a while. She said yes and told them she'd come pick them up. Jacob finished eating and went to sit on the couch. There was no TV in that room, so he sat in silence. He looked down the hallway toward an empty room. The door was open. There was a finger wrapped around the side of it. Jacob screamed and pointed, and his father grabbed him and ran out. Jacob's mother followed behind. They went to a gas station and sat out front until they saw Jacob's grandmother's truck. Jacob later described how unnatural the finger looked. He said it reminded him of a foam finger in length and width. It was wrapped completely around the door frame. The door itself latched on the opposite side. They didn't go back to that house much after that. Once they'd gotten everything out, they never returned. Nothing was stolen, but the window in the empty room was open. The man behind the couch. This happened to my dad when he was a little kid. I think it messed him up a bit emotionally, but he never admitted it. This story freaks me out just imagining it. So I'm pretty sure my dad was 10 years old and he was home alone for whatever reason. He was watching TV in the living room. It was the only TV in the house. And all of a sudden the TV just shut off. So he got up and turned it back on. It was an old, shitty TV, so it wasn't weird at all. When he got back on the couch, it happened again. He got up once again and turned the TV back on, and again it turned off. He repeated this process a couple more times before he started to look for the remote. While looking for the remote, he walked over to check behind one of the couches and saw a man hiding in the corner, holding the TV remote. My dad described the man as having long, messy hair and a crazed look in his eyes. He gave my dad a smile, and my dad ran out the front door screaming like a little girl. He went to his neighbors, who called the police. The man was still in the house when the police got there, so he was arrested. My dad told me that he still assumes the man was either homeless or crazy. Either way, this story is downright terrifying.